A potentially rocky road ahead for Mike Pompeo, a Senate panel set to vote against backing his nomination as Secretary of State, leaving him a narrow path for confirmation. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning to you. Nice
Wishes
to see
he had a longer weekend.
I just went by so quickly because the weather was so nice. So
finally.
Anyway, reality. Good morning. I'm Bill Hemmer. All 10 Democrats, along with Republican Rand Paul, at the moment have announced they will oppose Pompeo's nomination. But that does not shut the door ultimately, since the full Senate could vote to confirm him. So watch that. Here's Senator Corker.
Under ordinary times, he would be confirmed overwhelmingly. Secretary Clinton had one negative vote when she came through. John Kerry had no negative votes when they came through committee.
The things that were a bit of a put-off for me about Mr. Pompeo were a lot of his statements, and that's the past now.
Rich Edson live from Washington with more on this from the Hill today. How does it play out, Rich? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. And at 5 o'clock this afternoon, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will officially consider the nomination of Mike Pompeo to be the Secretary of State. The math right now is against him. All the committee Democrats and Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul say they're going to vote against Pompeo. President Trump leaned on Paul publicly last week, tried to get him to change his vote, though it doesn't seem that he's going to do so. The president tweeted just a short while ago, quote, "Hard to believe obstructionists may vote against Mike Pompeo for Secretary of State. The Dems will not approve hundreds of good people, including the ambassador to Germany. They are maxing out the time on approval process for all. Never happened before. Need more Republicans." Now, Republicans say they are still trying to persuade Rand Paul to change his vote, though if that does not happen, the Secretary of State nominee, Mike Pompeo, will not get what's called a favorable reporting out of that committee. Republicans say, though, they can still bring Pompeo's nomination to the full Senate floor, and there they say the math will very likely work. That's because Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota has come out and said that she's going to vote for Pompeo. There are also other Democrats Republicans say they might be able to get: Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Joe Donnelly of Indiana, and Doug Jones of Alabama, all states President Trump won in 2016. Bill.
I imagine Republicans want to get this done, right?
Yeah,
ASAP?
absolutely. Absolutely. And so does Pompeo. There's a meeting ongoing right now in Toronto, the G7 meeting. That's something that a Secretary of State, a fully confirmed one, would be attending. Later this week, there are NATO meetings in Brussels where they're expected to discuss the upcoming deadline on the Iran nuclear deal. And then there's all this diplomacy to set up a meeting, possibly for next month or the month after, between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. That's something that Pompeo's already doing as CIA director, but the administration Republicans argue it's diplomacy. They want the confirmation out of the Senate, Bill.
Thank you, Rich. Rich Edson watching that from the Hill. Going to be a lot of drama surrounding that. Thank you, Rich.
Meanwhile, Attorney General Jeff Sessions reportedly threatening to resign if President Trump fires Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. That news coming from the Washington Post. This coming as nearly a dozen Republican lawmakers have written a letter to the Justice Department demanding a criminal investigation into James Comey and members of the Obama administration over their handling of the Clinton email probe. Here's Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis on Sunday Morning Futures.
You look at somebody like Jim Comey. He testified before us in Congress that he did not decide to exonerate Hillary till after her interview, and yet subsequent efforts of oversight unearthed the memo that he wrote 2 months before he interviewed Hillary. That was an exoneration memo. So does the law apply equally to everybody, or is it just anyone who's associated with Trump gets nailed?
Well, that, of course, is the question. Here with me now, Republican Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee, and an honor to have you on set this morning, sir. All right, so what exactly is going on here, and what are Republicans asking for?
Well, a couple things. First of all, Jim Comey, I think, has messed this thing up from the get-go. I criticized him clear back in July of 2016 when he did his big press conference. I criticized him again in October when he reopened the Clinton investigation. I think all throughout this process he has been wrong, and sort of confirmed it when you looked at some of the things he wrote in the memos as well that we got to see last week. One of the questions we have is on the Michael Cohen raid. Was the Attorney General consulted? Did Rod Rosenstein actually talk to the Attorney General? Because remember, This raid was run out of, not under the umbrella of the special counsel, but it was Rod Rosenstein, according to press reports, who's been the one who said, let's go seek a warrant and actually raid, kick in the door of the president's lawyer. It seems to me when you do something like that, you should probably consult the Attorney General of the United States. So we got a letter going this morning that will ask that question from a number of us. Mr. Zeldin, Mr. Meadows, Mr. DeSantis, and I are sending a letter to the Attorney General to find out about that as we move forward.
So what if it is found that he was not consulted?
I think either way he should have been consulted, I think. I mean, this, again, it's not just any lawyer we're talking about. We're talking about the lawyer for the President of the United States, particularly, in fact, that it was not run under the as I said, the umbrella of the special counsel. So we'll see. I think it's an interesting point, and we'll find out. And
reports now that Jeff Sessions says that he may quit if Rod Rosenstein is fired. How would you describe the relationship right now between the DOJ and the White House? Because from our view, it looks pretty tense.
Yeah, I don't. It may be. You'd have to ask Mr. Sessions and Mr. Rosenstein that. What I know is the relationship between Congress and the DOJ is not where it needs to be. We have been asking for documents for 5 months now, and to date we've received approximately 6,000 documents. When we met with Mr. Lausch, the new U.S. attorney who's the point person that the department has brought in to comply with document production to Congress, Mark Meadows and I met with him and some other attorneys from the Department of Justice. I asked him 4 simple questions. What's the approximate universe of documents we're entitled to? What's the current steps in the current process to get us there? How many people does it have to go through before we get it? What's the standard for redaction right now? And the most important question, when are we going to get what Congress, a separate and equal branch of government, is entitled to? Their answers were to all 4 questions, I don't know. So that's not really confidence inspiring. We've been at this now 5 months. Get us the information we're entitled to so we can get the answers, more importantly, to the American people.
Are you confident things are changing? Because as outsiders and those not in Congress, as American people hear that and they think, that doesn't sound so good.
They're not changing fast enough, that's for sure. The idea that we did get to see the Comey memos, the idea that they have named a point person, those are all steps in the right direction. But look, you gotta do this much faster and much get the documents to us in a much more appropriate fashion without all the redactions that we currently receive on those documents.
So Comey's accused of mishandling the investigation into Clinton's private email server. These 11 House Republicans also want to talk about Clinton and her campaign contributing payments that ultimately led to the creation of the dossier. Yep. Attorney General Loretta Lynch, among many others, are mentioned in this letter. So where ultimately does this go, Congressman?
Well, hopefully we get answers. And the one thing that drives the American people, probably that drives them crazy more than anything else, is the idea that there are 2 standards now. There's one set of rules for us regular folk, and a different set if you're part of the politically connected class like Clinton and Comey and Lynch and Lerner and that sort of thing. That's what's got to change. That's why we need the documents to get the answers and to appropriately hold people accountable, like it looks like now Andrew McCabe is going to be. Remember what happened at the top levels of the FBI. Jim Comey was fired. Deputy Director Andrew McCabe was fired and now potentially faces prosecution. Jim Baker, former chief counsel at the FBI, demoted, reassigned. Peter Strzok, deputy head of counterintelligence, demoted, reassigned. Lisa Page, FBI counsel, demoted, reassigned. These are the top people at the FBI. When you have something like that go on, we need, as Congress, to get the information so we can ask the right questions and get answers for the American people.
You know, it's so nice to have you here in New York City on set, Congressman. We're always going to you in Washington, and we're always just trying to get some color, some idea what is happening on the ground there. How are you feeling about your party as we're now late April heading into the fall midterms?
If we do, I say this all the time and I say it because I mean it, if we do what we told the American people we're going to do, what they elected us to do, if we stay focused on that, we'll be fine at the next election. It's when we deviate from the mandate that was sent in the 2016 election, that's when we get in trouble. I think 2017 was a good year. I mean, taxes were cut, regulations were lowered, the economy is growing, ISIS is backpedaling, Gorsuch is on the court, the embassy is going to Jerusalem. By any standard, that is a darn good year. But 2018, this omnibus bill that passed a few weeks ago, was terrible. Worst piece of legislation I've seen in my 11 years in Congress. That's what has to change. In that bill, we had a process where we got to see that bill 15 hours before it was voted on. We got 1 hour debate, 2,232 pages, funded things we said we wouldn't, didn't fund things we said we would. That's what's got to change. Let's get back focused on what the American people like us to do.
You're a busy guy. We appreciate your time on set this morning, Congressman. Thank you very much. Jim Jordan.
9 minutes past. Breaking news now here. There's an ongoing hunt around Nashville for the suspect police say shot and killed 4 people at a Waffle House. Local schools in lockdown mode. No visitors allowed. The suspect with a history of mental problems and arrests.
Ryan King was arrested by the United States Secret Service for being in a restricted area near the White House in July of 2017. Among the weapons seized by those authorities was the AR-15 rifle used at the Waffle House. The guns were returned by Tazewell County authorities to Ryan King's father, who has now acknowledged giving them back to his son.
Well, James Shaw Jr., shown in this photo, pulling away the suspect's rifle, saving a number of lives. He says he's no hero. Many others would disagree on that, but the manhunt continues. 80 police officers from Nashville, ATF, FBI, Tennessee Highway Patrol, all involved in trying to find him and Toronto.
We will stay on that story for you. Meanwhile, Republicans voicing growing frustration over the Russia investigation.
They drilled a bunch of dry holes, never found any collusion. They moved to obstruction. They got a special counsel, and now God knows where this is going to go. But I think the American people are getting sick and tired of it.
Has the Russia probe run its course? And is it time for Robert Mueller to wrap it up? We will talk to a man who, he'll shed a little light on that. Karl Rove joins us live next.
Looking forward to that. Multiple tornadoes reported now, details and a trail of destruction. It is the season. It's changing, and look out there. We'll tell you where that's happening.
And a unique look inside Syria, showing powerful images of war and inspiring scenes of hope. We'll talk to the young journalist who risked his life to take these pictures.
Some severe weather. This is popping up now. Sweeping across the southern U.S. Several tornadoes reported. Strong winds in Louisiana, tearing roofs off homes and knocking mobile homes off their blocks. Look at that. Power's out in some areas. Fortunately, no injuries. No reports of injuries from that. Also, that is menacing. That's in Florida. Waterspout west of Tallahassee, about 140 miles. The storm causing heavy damage to property and taking down trees and power lines as it moves across the horizon there. Out from Florida. 15 minutes now past the hour.
I think that we all have frustration that we believe that the scope has gone well beyond what was intended to be investigations into meddling in the election. And I think that the House and the Senate have had their own investigations. The House has completed those. We're anxious for the Senate to complete his.
White House Legislative Director Mark Short sounding off on Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Let's bring in Karl Rove, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Karl, good to see you this morning. I would say it's safe to say there is growing frustration over the length of time this has been playing out for quite some time now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And look, if you're inside the White House and you've got a constant barrage of information about this, it distracts you from your other duties, and particularly has apparently concerned this president a lot, and he vents about it. So we should not be surprised when his people vent about it. On the other hand, the investigation is going to go as long as the investigation is going to go. And so working the refs saying you ought to wrap it up, it doesn't strike me as a particularly productive strategy. Robert Mueller is not going to wrap this thing up prematurely. He's going to wrap it up when he thinks he's ready to wrap it up. And the administration, I think, doesn't do itself much good by sounding these notes of alarm on the Sunday morning talk.
But Mark Short is saying something much more than that. He is saying that the scope of the investigation has it exceeded its original intention. Do you see that?
You know what? I don't, because we don't know. There is a scope that is contained in the original document authorizing Mueller's investigation. Mueller has gone back to the Deputy Attorney General in order to, when he has stumbled across evidence of some wrongdoing that is not directly with inside the brief. For example, he found the allegation is that Paul Manafort and Rick Gates were trying to bring $30 million in profits from their consulting on behalf of pro-Putin and pro-Russian oligarchs back to the United States without paying tax on it. So he had to go back to the Deputy Attorney General and said, we have evidence of this and we need authority to pursue it. And in some instances, for example, they came across what they believed to be some wrongdoing with regard to Michael Cohen, but they didn't believe that it was appropriate or even tangentially tied to their original brief, so they gave it over to the Southern District of New York. So, look, Mueller is by the book. He is a Boy Scout. You'll notice he doesn't leak. They stay focused on the mission. At the end of the day, I think he is going to be the best evidence for Donald Trump's view that there's no evidence of collusion and conspiracy, because I think that's what his report is going to find. No evidence of collusion or conspiracy on the part of Trump. There may be some problems involving Rick Gates and Paul Manafort, for example. The platform, the Republican platform, was changed from being a strong expression of support for Ukraine and Ukrainian democracy to being mute on the question, and there's some belief that those two individuals played a role in getting that done quietly. But I think the idea of collusion and conspiracy and cooperation between the Russians and the Donald Trump campaign Mueller is going to prove that is simply not the case, that none of that happened, and that is going to be the vindication the president wants.
Imagine that. If they actually let the investigation run its course, and at the conclusion of it, Mueller says absolutely no collusion. Imagine the world having to deal with that fact. Susan Collins is a Republican from Maine. The senator weighed in, and it sounds like she would urge the president to do that based on what she said here. Listen.
I believe he's staying within the parameters, and the proof of that is when he came across the allegations against Mr. Cohen, he did refer them back to the Justice Department.
Even though she went on to say that she doesn't believe that Cohen is central to this investigation. So take what you will from that.
Well, yeah, I agree. And look, two things. One is presidential campaigns tend to leak. No campaign in history leaked more than the Trump campaign. If there was any kind of a conspiracy or organized effort at collusion, we'd know about it because we would have heard about it from a dozen leakers. And the second point is, I think Trey Gowdy on Fox News Sunday a couple of weeks ago made a very good point. He was talking then to John Dowd. He was dressing John Dowd, the then president's lead attorney, saying, if your client is innocent, act innocent. And I don't think it helps the president when his people go on the Sunday morning talks and say, oh, God, you got to wrap this thing up, blah, 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 because it does, show confidence. The president, there's no evidence of collusion. I find it very hard to believe that after all of this time, that if there was evidence, we would have heard about it. So give the confidence that the American people like to see in their chief executive, and don't hyperventilate about this.
It's interesting, though, to hear Mark.
Elections can stop Russian meddling in our election. We know they tried to meddle. We know that they had trolls and bots in St. Petersburg attempting to influence the American election. Now, they failed, in my opinion, but we want to know what they're doing so we can stop them. And that's the one good thing that will come of all of this.
Good stuff. Karl Rove, great to start out the week with you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Right. In a moment here, a challenge for Mitt Romney. What's happening in his battle for a U.S. Senate seat that was not quite expected. Plus, Hillary Clinton playing the blame game yet again for her loss in 2016.
The relentlessly negative news has had a leveling effect that opens the doors to charlatans.
Well, Mitt Romney may have his work cut out for him in the race for the Senate seat in Utah. The former presidential candidate coming in second in that state's GOP convention voting behind State Representative Mike Kennedy. That officially puts them into a primary battle for the nomination.
I'm delighted with the outcome. Did very, very well. And on to a good important primary coming ahead. This is terrific for the people of Utah.
I'm a candidate with a compelling life story and a unique set of life circumstances that I'd love to use to serve the people of Utah.
Kennedy and Romney hoping to replace Senator Orrin Hatch, who's announced his retirement after 41 years in office.
So now the government estimated to take in $3.4 million in tax revenue for fiscal year 2018. The average American household paying $26,000 to Uncle Sam. But where's all that money go, huh? William LaJeunesse stands by live with his calculator in our newsroom in the West Coast. William, hello.
Well, Bill, the irony is what Americans argue about, foreign aid, farm subsidies, immigration, is not where most of the money goes. 40% is spent on each other after age 65.
You paid your taxes, but what did you buy?
I think it goes to the Army and a bunch of politicians' pockets.
This year, Congress will collect $26,000 per household, but spend $33,000. That almost $7,000 gap is what the government put on your credit card.
There's too many tax dollars that are collected that are spent on things that are frivolous.
More than a third, $12,000, goes to Social Security and Medicaid. A typical couple retiring today paid $500,000 into Social Security, but will take out $600,000 in benefits. Medicare, $140,000 in, $420,000 out.
We would have to more than double families' taxes just to pay the benefits that have been promised.
Another big expense, food stamps, Medicaid, cash subsidies for the poor, more than $6,000 a year. Defense spending, $5,000 per household. The next big expense, interest on the national debt. 7% of the budget, almost $2,500 a year.
Interest is the ticking time bomb. You have soaring deficits and interest rates that are about to go up.
The rest of your $33,000 pays for vets, federal pensions, Homeland Security, education, the FDA, highways, and foreign aid. Everything else cost about $2,000, a fraction of entitlements.
So the takeaway is that most taxpayers will get a lot more back than they pay in. You just don't appreciate it until you retire, Bill.
A lot of money. Thanks, William Lajeunesse, live in L.A. Thank you.
President Trump ramping up the fight against former FBI Director James Comey, accusing him of breaking the law for allegedly leaking classified information to the media. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano is here to weigh in next.
He's got a lot to say, too. Also, officials in Afghanistan say the Taliban killed 14 soldiers and police officers just today after dozens were killed in a suicide blast over the weekend. Details on what's happening in that war next. President Trump accusing James Comey of breaking the law by allegedly leaking classified information to the media. The president slamming the fired FBI director in a blistering tweet. It reads the following way: James Comey's memos are classified. I did not declassify them. They belong to our government. Therefore, he broke the law. Additionally, he totally made up many of the things he said that I said, and he is already a proven liar and leaker. Where are memos on Clinton, Lynch, and others? End tweet. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano with me now, and good day to you, sir.
Morning, Bill.
So, James Comey was characterized as a Boy Scout with an American government, and the more interviews he does, the more questions that seem to be quite revealing. With regard to that specific allegation, whether or not he broke the law.
The president's allegations?
Yeah. What do you think? Did he?
Well, it's going to depend upon which four of the 7 memos were leaked to the professor, whether anything in there was classified at the time, whether it was properly classified, and whether the professor exposed classified materials. I don't think the professor did this. This law school professor is a former ranking official of the DOJ who once had a security clearance and knows what it's like to deal with these things. So, question 1. When Jim Comey handed these 4 memos over, had anything in there been classified, or was the classification retroactive? Question 2, was the classification, if retroactive, a proper classification, or was it classified for some other purpose? Question 3, was anybody harmed by Jim Comey passing those memos on to the professor? That's what the government is interested in before they decide.
I got to write this stuff down.
You may have it written down for you.
My word, right here. My gosh. Okay, so Jonathan Turley, law professor, on earlier today with Ainsley.
Yeah,
he was about this question, the classified material going public, good friend of yours, as you say.
Right.
He characterized it this way.
He certainly did violate the rules of the FBI. This was not some type of personal diary, as so many in the media portrayed it as. This is clearly FBI material covered by FBI regulations. You're not allowed just to take them and leak them to the media.
All right, well, in that comment, he did not reference the law. He referenced the rules.
It is clear that FBI and DOJ regs were violated by the mere delivery of those memoranda, even if they didn't contain anything classified, to the professor. So the professor friend of Comey's, this professor, Jonathan Turley, is correct there. But I think that the House Intel or Judiciary Committee is more interested in whether or not Jim Comey violated any federal law, not whether he violated DOJ regs, for the simple reason that he doesn't work for the Department of Justice anymore. They can't do anything to him as a result of the violation of those regulations because they weren't discovered until after he was fired.
Well, you remember the question that Senator Grassley had 11 months ago under oath? I mean, did he lie under oath?
He may very well have lied under oath. Senator Grassley obviously knew what he was asking and knew that there was contrary testimony under oath. So, will he be prosecuted for lying or misleading the Congress? If it's a clear case of lying or misleading, I think he will be. If it is a he said, she said, so to speak, even though in this case it's he said, I don't think they will, because they don't like to waste juries' times with that.
Well, one last question. You read the Comey memos released at the end of last week,
yes,
and probably a weekend to marinade. What do you think now?
I don't think there was anything in there that was classified. I really don't. I think those were his own recollections, maybe self-serving, maybe truthful about his conversations.
Classified or not, what is your summary of what you learned in there?
I think it's an indictment, lowercase I, not an indictment from a grand jury. It's an indictment of the president, if those are accurate.
The memos?
Yes.
In what sense?
Well, the memos are what Jim Comey told whatever committee testified before, I don't remember which one it was, shortly after he was fired, that the president attempted to interfere in the investigation of Mike Flynn. That doesn't mean the president did. It means that in Jim Comey's view, there is evidence of it.
Okay.
So the memos back up the testimony that he gave.
All right. Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
Come on back.
Of course.
Okay. Sandra.
A horrific bombing attack by the Taliban has left dozens dead in Afghanistan. 57 people were killed, with over 100 wounded at a voter registration center. David Lee Miller live in Jerusalem for us. David Lee, what more do we know about this latest violence?
Sandra, that's right. Let's start with the latest violence today in Afghanistan. At least 18 police and soldiers in Afghanistan were killed today alone in two almost simultaneous attacks. The first one happening in Badghis province, which is in the western part of the country. Militants today launched assaults targeting army units and the police. The Taliban have claimed responsibility. Also today in western Farah province, 4 police were killed in a firefight with the Taliban. A spokesman for the provincial governor there said 3 members of the Taliban were killed. And yet, in another attack, also today, Sandra, 3 civilians were killed in eastern Nangarhar province. All of them, we are told, are brothers. No group has taken responsibility for this incident. 3 civilians, all brothers, but local officials there believe that the Islamic State is to blame. Sandra.
And yesterday there was an even more deadly attack. What do we know there about the motive?
That's right. As you mentioned, 57 people killed, at least 57, more than 100 were wounded. All of the victims here were registering for national ID cards in preparation for a parliamentary election in October. The force of the blast was so powerful, windows were shattered more than a mile away. All the local roads leading to the blast site shut down. Local television broadcast live pictures at local hospitals as frantic residents sought information on missing loved ones. The Islamic State said it was responsible for the bombing, saying that it was targeting Shiite non-believers. Afghanistan's president issued a statement saying, quote, terrorist attacks will not stop people from taking part in the upcoming election. The UN Secretary General called for those responsible to be brought to justice. The country's security forces, assisted by the United States, Sandra, have been struggling in the last several months to try and do something to reduce what has been an uptick, a surge in the amount of violence caused by militants. Sandra?
David Lee Miller, thank you.
In a moment here, Hillary Clinton taking aim at a new target when it comes to why she lost, what the former Democratic nominee is now saying.
The mainstream political coverage was influenced by the right-wing media ecosystem.
So you're on candid camera, smile. Just make sure your pet's doggy-doo is not in the picture. Is that what he said? Park officials in New Canaan, Connecticut, installing field cameras to catch dog owners who do not clean up after their pets. The fine for leaving it behind could add up to more than $130. So you've been warned.
And you know, not knowing that your dog did his or her business.
How do you not
and
know?
saying I didn't see. That's not an excuse.
Yeah, you were right about that.
I'm a responsible dog owner.
Take responsibility.
You need to
bring a bag. They could use that in my neighborhood.
Someday you're going to meet my whiskey.
Okay.
My German short hair.
Right on.
The mainstream political coverage was influenced by the right-wing media ecosystem. Relentlessly negative news has had a leveling effect that opens the doors to charlatans.
Hillary Clinton lashing out at a new target, adding the media to her list of reasons for losing the election. Chris Bedford is editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller Foundation. Richard Goodstein is a Democratic political consultant. He was an advisor to Clinton's 2008 campaign. I feel like we've set it up, and you two can kind of just go at this. But Chris, yet another excuse.
It's a little sickening to hear this long string of excuses. I mean, there were parts of the media that were a little more hostile to Hillary Clinton. There always are parts of the media that are hostile to somebody who's running for president of the United States. But there are also outlets, for example, with the health story, when Hillary Clinton collapsed after an hour in mild weather in New York. 5 days before, Politico had called it bonkers. Andrea Mitchell had said it was a conspiracy theory. People had dismissed this. Washington Post had run something that said, can we please stop talking about Hillary Clinton's health now? There was a massive array of defenders of Clinton when she was running for president. And what's even more sickening about this to me is the reaction from a lot of people in the media. This speech on Sunday is being called an olive branch because she said a couple of nice things about people now that they're being relentlessly anti-Trump. That's not the job of reporters.
All right, Richard, maybe I was assuming too much. Maybe you're not going to defend her here.
Hillary Clinton's a private citizen, Sandra. She lost the election 18 months ago. The fact that we're having this segment right now proves the fact that there is this obsession. If Hillary Clinton didn't exist, we would have to create her as the walls are kind of caving in on Donald Trump. If the tables were turned and Hillary Clinton had won narrowly and her administration was collapsing, probably people on my side would be talking about Donald Trump to change the subject. Look, the fact is, if Donald Trump were such a fantastic candidate and Hillary Clinton were so miserable of a candidate, she wouldn't have been way ahead before Comey went outside the bounds of the DOJ.
Comey's fault, right.
10 days. Well, I'm just saying, it wouldn't. If he was so great, if Trump were so great,